Boys, we got a lot to unpack today as hotfix 3.1.1.1 rolled out yesterday, essentially nerfing stasis. Now, it wasn't all bad. We also have some buffs to talk about. That's right. Warlocks, Shadebinder got a buff, so you should be pleased. But let's start with actually the general stasis tuning. Dustfill grenades have actually had a reduction in their pull, effectively reducing the pull range from 9.5 meters to now 6 meters. Now, inside of PvE, Dustfills still remain the same, but inside of PvP, it is very noticeable. Number one, that yoink is not nearly as much of a yoink. I mean, it still yoinks you, and it's still got good range, but you got to be a little more accurate with your grenade placement. On top of that, I feel like escaping Dustfill grenades is so much easier. That's actually due to the fact that there is a reduction in slow stacks being applied to players. Still the same inside of PvE, but inside of PvP, yes, escaping Dustfill grenades is definitely possible. Now, granted, slow still affects your aim. You can see the flare out there of our reticle, indicating the inaccuracy that is now in effect now that we've been slowed. And again, that reduction in slow stacks on each tick of the grenade went from 10 to just 5 stacks per tick. Again, this remains unchanged inside of PvE. Quite amazing that these characteristics are completely different between PvE and PvP. Bungie's finally done it. Now, stasis crystals, there's been a reduction in the crystal shatter damage against players. 85 max, 55 minimum. It's now 55 max, 25 minimum. PvE damage is unchanged. The big takeaway from this one, guys, is yes, you can survive crystal shatter damage. And I did this over and over again, and sometimes it would give me the kill. But for the most part, like with Shadow Dive right here, you have to be on point. I mean, you have to make contact with the enemy that is frozen. Really what this is going to push people to do that are rocking this combo with Glacier Grenades is essentially you're going to have to take advantage of Whisper Fissures for that increase in damage and size and bursts of your stasis when you destroy a stasis crystal or defeat a frozen target. Also, Whisper of Chains. Reduce Whisper of Chains damage resistance bonus while in your super from 25% to now 5%. Fellas, I rely on this fragment so much, especially inside of trials. I find myself in a sticky situation, I throw a grenade down, boom, I've got damage resist. But that's been toned down for supers. And for something like Behemoth, this was a disgusting fragment, considering the heavy attack on Behemoth places those crystals down, resulting in it also obstructing your enemy's view and giving you resist. So now 25% to 5. Again, this only affects damage from other guardians. So those are your general stasis tunings. Now let's break this class by class. We're going to start with Titans. First up, Glacier Quake. There's been a removal of the AoE freeze against players on super casts. This will still freeze inside of PvE. Again, this blows my mind that the identities of these supers are completely different between both these game types. But yeah, Behemoth is a roaming super. It should not be utilized as a shutdown super. But with that AoE freeze, upon popping your super, it was being utilized as a shutdown pseudo panic super, which is not how it was supposed to be. There's also been a reduction in damage resistance while in your super from 60% to 50%. This is probably the biggest change. Like, out of everything here, the big takeaway with this one is that an adaptive sniper rifle can one-shot kill you at 6 resilience or less. Originally, aggressives could do it with ease, and I think Adored could possibly do it with Vorpal, but having 50% resist instead of 60 is huge here for all weapons, especially weapons like Dead Man's Tail that can roll with Vorpal. You will absolutely wreck a Behemoth Titan. And if there was something noticeable about my gameplay here, I couldn't continually push like I previously could. I just constantly found myself close to death, and I had to pull back. I had to play more strategically. And if it was a team that was backing up together, ready to team shot me, I was dead. There's also been an increase in energy costs of using Shiver Strike while in Glacial Quake from 3% to now 7%. This is super noticeable, guys. You cannot light attack around the map all you want. You definitely want to take advantage of things like Cryoclasms or Slide to enable you to move around the map without burning your super. But arguably, the biggest change is this one right here. Using the combo of Shiver Strike into a heavy slam attack will now cost the full super energy of both the Shiver Strike as well as the Heavy Slam. So for the longest time, you can use your light attack. And as you were coming out of your light attack, you can heavy attack immediately and it would use no super energy. The only thing that would be consumed was the actual light attack super energy itself. Now, both of those will be used, thus resulting in you not having this super very long if you plan on spamming your attacks. Again, very similar to what happened to Spectral Blades, what was it, a year and a half ago, where the overall duration of the super has not been affected, but instead the consumption of super energy is what's been affected. And for here, that bump from 3% to now 7%, as well as the double consumption from light attack and heavy attacks in that combo, will result in Glacial Quake not lasting nearly as long. Also, Shiver Strike increased downward velocity applied to Shiver Striking players when they are slow to more quickly pull them out of the air. Fellas, I've read this thing over and over again. I still don't understand it. The hell is it talking about? I even had Les slow me a few times, and then I would Shiver Strike out of that Dustfield Grenade. Something about downward velocity being increased. Yeah. Okay, Bungie. That's essentially Titans though, guys. Noticeable changes. Out of everything here, probably the reduction in its super damage resist from 60 to 50% is huge. Which takes us to Warlocks. Ah, yes, Warlocks. Good news for you. Winter's Wrath. Improved tracking of Winter Wrath's projectiles. Now tracking strength decays from its maximum value over 10 seconds instead of 2.2 seconds. Look, I kept backing up. And let me go ahead and just say this, by the way. The tracking for these initial projectiles only tracks on targets that are not already frozen. The tracking breaks once the target is frozen because it wants you to do the follow-up shatter in order to kill that target. On targets that you have not frozen, the tracking, 50 meters, maybe 60 meters. Guys, I mean, it's got a lot of stretch. And that tracking zones in pretty aggressively. And you don't need all 3 of those stasis shards to make contact in order to freeze your opponent. Just one. And 9 times out of 10, despite the distance I was at, one of those would break off and freeze less. Now, the shockwave, the thing that actually shatters the frozen target. Despite it having tracking upwards to 50, maybe even 60 meters, in order to actually shatter your opponent, you have to be within 30 meters, somewhere around that mark. So yes, you will have to close the gap in order to secure the kill. But the overall increase there in its tracking, the detonation radius also being increased. So even if you miss and say you like hit kind of in the proximity of their foot, it'll still freeze the target. The main takeaway is that overall, this super has become more forgiving. Now, the Penumbral Blast melee has actually been reduced from 80 to now 30 damage. PvE damage is unchanged. I know some people might be bummed out about that one, but again, you're still able to freeze the target, lock them into place, and for the most part, once you freeze the target, it's easy cleanup. Now, Ice Flare Bolts. This is actually the turret from our Blink Watcher stasis aspect. It actually had a bug where it would just sit there and continuously switch targets and not actually focus on one. But it also got a bump in target acquisition range by 33%, as well as turning speed that can more effectively hit nearby targets. And again, this is a buff not just to PvP, but even inside of PvE. Overall, guys, Warlocks and their super feels a lot better, feels more forgiving, and I actually think it's one of the best supers for shutting down other supers. I wouldn't look at this as like a mass kill super. It can be. To me though, Shadebinder is one of the hardest supers to go up against. And now with the improvement to its tracking, it's even deadlier. Now moving on, we have Revenant Hunters. Fellas, I got some bad news for my hunters. First up, they removed damage resistance from Shadow Dive. They also added a 4-second cooldown between activation of Shadow Dive, which means you can't just Shadow Dive over and over again. Now, Withering Blade, the melee, got a decrease in its damage, going from 90 to now 65. Now, PvE is still unchanged. They also decreased Withering Blade's slow stacks from 60 to now 40. Now, you need 100 in order to freeze the target. This means even with double Withering Blades making contact with the enemy, this will not freeze the opponent. You will have to do 2 Withering Blades, including maybe even a dodge, if you're taking advantage of the aspect Winter Shroud, in order to actually freeze the opponent. There's also been a decrease in target acquisition range of Withering Blade after it impacts a player from 12 meters to now 8 meters. Range after impacting PvE enemies is unchanged. Overall, guys, Withering Blade is a tracking melee. It still applies 65 damage. It still slows your target, thus messing up their accuracy pretty substantially. And that was the identity here that Bungie's trying to go for. Notice, even in the general fixes, Bungie has not adjusted stasis in that aspect. Slow still works the same. Target accuracy still gets reduced to hell and back. And overall, the tracking and even the ricochet capabilities of Withering Blade still makes it a great option for all situations. It's just not nearly as cheesy as it used to be. So guys, those are your stasis changes. Yes, stasis is still very, very good. You're probably going to see a lot of people still use stasis. From a fundamental perspective, stasis is still the same. It still freezes or slows targets. It still messes them up mid-gunfight. And there's a variety of ways to do it. But overall, these changes are going to bring them a little more in line with some of our light-based subclasses. And maybe we we might start seeing a little more variety. I do think there needs to be an overhaul of light-based subclasses for those that have been left behind. But overall, these changes are pretty positive. So guys, try it out for yourselves. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.